What's the weirdest thing you've ever seen happen at work? I work in an office and thought it would be funny to put googly eyes on my coworker's desk one day. Everyone had a good laugh over it. In a couple weeks, I found googly eyes on all my stuff. It became a game of who could arrange googlies on people's desk in the most creative, funny manner. It was hilarious. Then, one of the adjacent departments caught wind of the good times we were having and started doing the same. Cue a month later and there are ducking googly eyes everywhere. It was absurd. On the drinking fountains, clocks, vending machines, garbage cans, toilets, you name it. There were googly eyes littered all over the goddamn place. The custodians started complaining that they couldn't keep up with the mess. Visiting customers would look around at the googly spectacle in disbelief of the unprofessionalism. The head managers had to hold team meetings to talk to all the teams about removing all googly eyes. And of course, since I started it, anytime a rogue googly eye popped up months later, I got a stern look from my boss. The day that I quit there, or get fired more likely, there will be an unleashing of googly eyes that will be unrivaled. People will be ducking, swimming through piles of googly eyes just to get to their completely googly eye-covered desks. The vents will be spitting out plastic eyeballs of all shapes and sizes. People will open their lunches they brought from home and gasp in shock as they find nothing but little beady, shaky eyes looking up from their Tupperware. There will be googly eyes. Story 2. While working at a supermarket, I was walking through the dairy department and saw a fellow employee over by the eggs. As I got closer, I could see him with a carton open, and he seemed to be turning each egg. After doing the whole pack, I asked him what he was doing, and he responded, "The manager asked me to rotate the eggs." I facepalmed and explained what they actually meant, to which he replied, "That makes a lot more sense." For context, in the grocery world, to rotate means to make sure the earliest dates of expiration are towards the front of the shelf. Story 3. My weirdest counter with him, though, was I had to go into the lab during lunch, and he was in there, with all the lights off, wearing nothing but an undershirt, lifting a single weight, with Let's Grove by Earth, Wind, and Fire at full volume playing from his computer. Also, his desk neighbor has had to make one of his monitors vertical because Igor will change at his desk in the middle of the office. Today, I'd like to tell you all about the Henry J. Finch of my workplace. He's a small, old Russian man named Igor. Normally, I change people's names when I tell stories about them on the internet. However, given this guy is literally a Soviet era, Russian named Igor, it would be a disservice to the story to tell it any other way. Ridiculous crap happens with him all the time, story from above. But today, I want to recount just what happened in a single software review with this guy. It started out great when he showed up half an hour late to an hour-long meeting because he didn't realize that we were having our weekly software review at the same time on the same day that we always have it. The department manager asked him where he was, and he said, "In a machine diving." Now, Igor has a very thick Russian accent, so it's reasonable to assume that you misunderstood something when what he said doesn't make sense, and we work on non-aquatic trains, so diving really doesn't make sense. The department manager asked, "Driving?" And Igor said, "No, diving," and mimed swimming. The department manager decided to leave that one alone. A few minutes later, we were talking about having to send someone up to Richmond to meet with a company there. Igor interrupted everyone to say, "Richmond is the capital of Virginia." And you know what? He's right. It sure is. Eventually, we got to reviewing his tasks, and every single one was on the backlog save one, which was on hold. He wasn't actively working on any of them, and only one of them had a projected end date, February 28th, 2022. Now, I know that most people aren't software engineers, so let me explain that these tasks should usually be anywhere from a day to a week, maybe a month if it's a really big one, not 25 months. But this kind of thing is normal for Igor. So let's move on to the next thing. He croaked. It sounded just like a frog. He opened the corner of his mouth and croaked, and absolutely nobody acknowledged it. A few minutes later, someone asked who the cube avatar was. Every person in this system has an avatar that shows up on all of their tasks so that you can tell who each task is assigned to. Since the mine was the cube avatar, I let the asker know. Then Igor perked up and said, "A cube, square on all sides." Then he let out a slight chuckle and settled back down in his seat and continued, "Born perfectly." All of this took place inside the half hour that he was actually in the meeting, and barely any of it was acknowledged by the more senior employees. Story 4. In a creche daycare. One of the moms dropped off her baby, and when handing him to one of the staff, she kissed the staff member on the face and said, "Love you," and went off to work. Phoned a couple hours later to say, "I've just realized what I did this morning. I'm so sorry, I was half asleep, and I guess I'm so used to handing him to my husband." We had a good laugh. Story 5. The CEO and I entered the building early one morning and found a longtime well-liked employee lying past on the locker room floor. The guy apparently suffered a major heart attack and died alone. Story 6. I watched the neighbor get caught by her husband mid-cheat. This was the last home hospice job I did. The client's bedroom was at the back of the house and had a large window that faced the front of the neighbors across a dirt road. We were sitting mid-morning drinking a cups and watching the birds in the low hedge when we saw a naked man suddenly sprint across the side yard into the old garage, followed by the just as naked wife, and a few seconds later, the husband. A lot of screaming follows. Then the naked man took off across the field and disappeared into the orchard. Several minutes pass before we see the wife dash over to her car, still naked, get in and drive off. My client, who was quite a spitfire of a lady her entire life, turned to me very deadpan and said, "I'm glad I lived long enough to see that." We didn't stop laughing the rest of the day. Story 7, worked at big outdoor activities center a few summers. There's lots of behind-the-scenes areas where the public can't see. Saw a new guy, who was definitely some friend of a friend of a friend favor hire from someone higher up, not know where the toilets were, so just take a crap in a hedge behind scenes. I found him mid-crap. He proceeded to make really crude moves on all the women, and I later found him receiving a BJ from a guy in the same hedge. He was asked to leave. Story 8. It was a really slow day, and I kept getting distracted from the Lord of the Rings fan fiction I was reading by the weird squeaky noises I kept hearing behind me. I finally turned around, and there was my manager, a 35-year-old man, about 3/4 of the way done, with making a balloon animal crown for his life-sized Homer Simpson statue. I asked him to make me a doggy when I was done, and he did. A blue one. I kept it until I accidentally popped it, which scared the crap out of one of my other coworkers. Story 9. One guy did a spicy wing challenge at lunch. Later that afternoon, he was on the floor of his cubicle, moaning and crying and saying duck so many times very loudly. We tried to call an ambulance, but he was adamant that he was going to be fine. Story 10. I worked the cameras at a casino, and there was a kid, old enough to drink, who was given a free room to stay in because he was about to drive drunk. Instead of taking the room, he checked in, walked out the back exit, ran down a hill, ran full speed along the highway, Army crawled his way up to his car, got in, drove off the parking lot, and was pulled over immediately. Story 11. This was in the 80s at a bad software company run entirely by men. Wonder of wonders. An extremely competent and popular woman programmer was appointed to a management position in development. The younger developers decided to have a parade. She was of Scandinavian descent, so they made for her a horned helmet and sword out of aluminum foil, and made for her a sedan chair out of a wooden chair with a couple of pieces of lumber under the arms for support. Then, they carried her outside on the chair while she waved her sword and paraded her around the parking lot at the head of a long column of programmers, wearing fish hats and throwing firecrackers. I never understood the fish hats. And kazoo music. I forgot that. Those were the days. Story 12. While working at a pizza place in Los Angeles, I had a customer come in with her young daughter, probably around 8 to 11 years old. They had balloons and other birthday paraphernalia. First thing the mother says is that it's her daughter's birthday today. I said happy birthday to the daughter, who replied with, "Thank you, but it was actually Friday." The mom had a kind of nervous look on her face, but quickly took it off. I didn't see this as a red flag, but it was definitely strange. They look over the menu for a minute or two and place their order, and it was roughly $100 worth of food. The mom then asks me if we can deliver to a nearby park where they would be having the birthday party. This was also strange, as people usually place delivery orders over the phone, but this had happened a couple times before, so I didn't think much of it. Once it comes time for payment, the mom asks if we have any sales or specials. This pizza place is popular and relatively high-end, so we rarely offer any kind of discounts for non-regulars. I told her no, we don't have any kind of discounts. She gave me a reluctant, okay, and asked for the price. I told her the price, and she tried to haggle with me. I told her that I couldn't lower the price. She kept insisting I give her a better deal on the food. Eventually, I gave up and said that I would give her 10% off, our friends and family discount. She then asked for 25% off. I told her no, and that she could take the 10% or leave. She left. The whole thing was weird, but we have to deal with scammers once in a while. I've never had someone try to haggle me before, but this isn't the weird part. About 10 minutes after this all went down, the young daughter comes inside, alone and holding a smartphone out. The daughter comes up to me and asks me if they can get more than 10% off their order. I noticed that the mom was on speakerphone with her. That's why she had the phone out in her hand. The mom was listening to the conversation. She sent her daughter in hoping that I would feel bad for the kid and give them a discount. I definitely felt bad for the daughter. She must have been so embarrassed, and it made me furious. I leaned in closer to the phone so that Karen of a mom could hear me and said, "I can't give you the discount, and it's kind of awful that your mom is doing this. Unlike your mom, you seem like a really nice, sweet girl. How would you like a free slice of pizza?" I showed her all the slices we had available, hoping she would feel better. And then she says that she doesn't really like pizza. This only further confirmed that the mom is a trashy piece of crap who used her daughter to scam us for cheap pizza. My blood boiled. How can anyone be that trashy? and don't get your kid involved in your little scheme. Anyways, I then offered the daughter a free soda. She didn't accept. I offered her a bottle of water. She didn't accept. Eventually, I just told her that she was really nice and should never do what her mom is doing. I wish I had the chance to speak with the mom alone so I could tell her she's a piece of crap and should go duck herself. I just hope that the daughter doesn't grow up to be like her mom. Side note, thank God for the honesty of little kids. If I believed that little girl actually had a birthday that day, I maybe would have given them a big discount. And duck that mom for putting in so much work and making her daughter lie. Story 13. I used to be a movie theater manager in college. One night, I was preparing the next projector for showing on a 35mm camera, so no digital, and I looked into the auditorium that I thought was empty and saw a guy receiving a HJ from a girl. Upon seeing this, I did what any responsible manager would do. I called the other manager up from the box office to assess the situation. He confirmed that, and we laughed so hard we thought that they heard us. At this point, I'm guessing they had been there for at least 13 minutes, so I figured that the guy was probably close to end soon. So I turned the overhead house lights in the auditorium on and off a few times. The guy stood straight up, pulled up his pants quickly, and ran down the stairs and out of the exit door leading directly outside to the parking lot. Bro straight up left his girl there. She eventually left too, and I never saw them again. Story 14. This happened about 4 years ago. We teach English at a school in South China. Generally, there are a couple types of people who do this sort of work, abroad in a foreign country away from your friends and family. The adventurous, the ones running away from something, or those who like the money. One year, we got a new intern who was none of these types and was obviously not prepared for the realities of life in China. Eventually, all the pressures she felt boiled over in spectacular fashion. But first, I need to set the stage. About a month beforehand, another foreign coworker and some of the Chinese staff and I were sitting in the break room during our awesome 2-hour lunch period. People in the South here, like a post-lunch nap. We were all chatting, and our girl, Elle, asks how to properly ask for the price of something in Mandarin. Someone tells her when the other foreign coworker, who was peeling an apple with a knife, speaks up and says basically this: "But that's not how you get the real price. You're foreign, so they'll charge you more. What you need to do is, using knife for emphasis and fake threatening imaginary seller say, 'Duo Xiaoqian.'" Everyone laughs and goes back to what they were doing. Anyway, about a month after this event, one Friday morning, she asks if I remember this incident, and I do. She is excited and tells me that she's gonna bring up the incident with the managers and maybe even the police because he threatened her life. I, already knowing after a few months that she has a few screws loose, basically smile and nod and then go to class. I quickly tell my coworker as I'm not crazy and think he should get out ahead of this. Anyway, that afternoon we have our company-wide meeting, announce schedule changes and events and all that such. Everyone is there at the company. 20 foreign teachers, 20 plus Chinese assistants, and a handful of office staff. Before the manager gets fully into her spiel, Elle stands up and asks for a moment. She produces a piece of paper with a prepared speech on it, and she launches into a tirade. She accuses the guy of threatening her life in the above incident to her throat and pressing demands he is fired and reported to the police for attempted murder and how her emotional state is strained and fragile. While this is going on, people are actively trying to get her to sit down and stiffu. The best part is when a manager has enough and stands up to try and physically take her out of the room. Now the room is just a giant table, about 5 to 6 meters long and 2 wide, with some desks and computers around the perimeter. Now what happens is truly a slapstick comedy sketch, as the manager tries to tackle this girl, who is still reading from her speech as they chase each other around the table. A second manager gets involved, and she is now trying to dodge 2 managers while calling for the arrest of the apple peeler. Eventually, she gets cornered and dragged off another room to calm down and do this whole thing in private. For closure's sake, everyone was talked into, including me, being chief witness, and the official line was she just cracked under the stress of being in China and would fly home in a week. We've had people leave quickly or hate China and not adapt well, but nothing like this in my whole time here. Story 15. I work in a kindergarten for kids with special needs. One kid kept going for a quiet place a few times a day, and we figured he just needed some time alone. This was outside in the playground, where there was a little tree house in the back behind some trees. On the 3rd day of this happening, I went to see what's up and encouraged him to talk about why he needed time alone. I found him sitting on the ground, eating one big spoon full of sand after the other. We're not just talking baby eating sand here, more like a medium-sized kid shoveling sand down his stomach like it was his favorite food. So yeah, this little boy probably ate a lot of sand during those 3 days and probably longer. He's fine now, 2nd grader now. Kicked me in the butt when I saw him in a grocery store a week ago. Story 16. I worked as a caterer in Aspen Co. and did a lot of events at a particular billionaire's home. One 4th of July, the guests got extra wild. They started doing substances at 10 in the morning, were plastered by noon, and showing me their tits by 1. The 12,000 square foot mansion was modeled after a Scottish castle. They had a gravel drive with identical gravel pieces and a man whose only job it was to rake the drive every time someone drove on it. The homeowner had thousands of endangered animals mounted on his walls, posed to look like one was eating or hunting the other. He shot adorable chipmunks off his balcony while he drank his morning coffee. Needless to say, his events were always on the strange side. This was different. This day in particular, after the substances, binge drinking, and Jerry Springer-esque raging, some drunk wealthy broad boasted that they would all be heading to the guest house for a group sex. I thanked her for the information and told her we'd send a car when the hors d'oeuvres were ready. My then boyfriend transported them to the sex site, and we continued preparation. The home chef made all sort of elaborate appetizers and desserts. He had been preparing lobster tails for the last 48 hours and had made the most incredible lamb I've ever tasted. We were basically ready to go, and we get a call. Some of the guests had decided to take the four-wheelers for a ride down the public road, coked out, still wasted, and managed to crash into a ravine and were stuck at the bottom. We had to wait for a helicopter to rescue them and didn't know if any had died or been injured. A couple hours later, we find out everyone is fine but one guy. He had a compound fracture of his left arm. They flew him to the nearest hospital. If you could see where they crashed, you'd be surprised any of them made it at all. Anyways, most of the guests reconvene at the house and we prepare to serve the meal. Considering no one was criminally charged and no one died, the staff thought people would be relieved and ready to eat. So we get them to sit, serve the food, and all take our places around the table, eagerly waiting for someone to drop a fork so we can pick it up for them. And one woman speaks up and says, "We're too distraught to eat. I can't even look at this food right now. This traumatic event is just too much. Take it away." So we rush over, take the food back to the caterer's kitchen, and look at each other like, WTF just happened? The chef goes to talk to the host, and he confirms that no one wants to eat. So we start packaging the food and cleaning the kitchen. Each staff member ended up taking several $100s worth of food home that night. Then people want to leave because there's really not much left to do. Everyone was sobering up and coming down from the blow. In response, the host decided that the fun wasn't over, proceeded to lock everyone in the house, blast Keisha, and told them they couldn't leave until he was ready. We ended up staying at this damn event until 2 a.m., watching filthy rich people mope around and cry. I found the crash in the paper the next day. It read, "Devastating crash, substance use suspected." Obviously, they got away with it. Story 17. For backstory, I work in an area that has a high population of homeless people. One day I pulled up to work and got out of my car. I had to park across the street from my office next to an empty dirt lot because our parking is very limited. When I got out, I saw a homeless man laying on an old, abandoned couch right next to my car. He was playing the guitar and had a bottle of alcohol laying next to him. He looked at me as I was looking at him, so I smiled back and told him to have a nice day. He smiled too and told me to have a good day as well. I looked out my office window a few times that day to check on him. My entire shift for about 6.5 hours, he was just laying on that couch, sleeping. His guitar was still right next to him and his bottle was now empty. Even when I left that day, he was still laying there. I contemplated giving him one of my blankets I had in my car, but it was my childhood blanket, so I couldn't. Came back the next day and there was an ambulance, police cars, and a giant white van surrounding where that man once laid. I guess a bunch of my coworkers were checking the guy out the day before because something didn't seem right, but they just assumed he was drunk. Nope, he passed. Nobody even knew until the next day when my coworker went up to the homeless guy and asked if he was okay. Kind of shook everyone up for a little. Pretty sad stuff. Story 18. A coworker in a cotton mill had a heart attack and passed right there on the floor. The supervisor roped off the area around him and work continued. EMT coroner. Police were all doing their job as we worked around them. Story 19. I worked in a small office. There was a front lobby area with a conference room off to the side, and it was separated by a door from the rest of the office. So I'm sitting at my desk, just working, and I hear screaming from the front lobby area. Like straight up someone is being murdered, screaming. Everyone in the office area is freaking out, assuming there was a robbery or something horrible happening in the front. I hear someone shrieking for help, so I'm like, okay, this is clearly not a dangerous situation, and it must be a medical emergency or something like that. I tell one of my coworkers to call 911. I proceed to open the door quietly and walk towards the lobby. I do not see anyone, even the receptionist, but the screaming is still going on from inside the conference room. I slowly open the door and find about 8 people on top of the table, including the owners of the company and a couple clients. I'm just staring at them, seriously confused about what I just walked into. I look down and see a tiny little field mouse hopping around in circles around the table. I picked the little guy up and became the hero of the day. 911 dispatched a couple of police officers over a tiny mouse. My raise that year was substantially higher than usual. Story 20. Today is a contender. I work in a warehouse and we were receiving this big transfer of just a bunch of crap. I lift some boxes and, dude, a freaking caterpillar started walking out. We're keeping it in a small box right now, and I've given it some pieces of lettuce. My youngin' is chilling right now, edit. We're in the middle of a cold-ass winter, so I'm not even thinking about letting it out. I'm conflicted, if I'm being honest. I've done some reading, and I'm confident this one is a woolly bear caterpillar, not only due to its appearance, but where in the world it appears, which is where I live. In my reading, I've discovered that they go around roadsides and meadowy areas in the winter, and yes, these things survive especially well in the winter. With that being said, I'm thinking of letting the little guy go. I don't want to take him in just to lack the proper tools to care for him. I'd rather let him out to be free. I'm glad I got him anyway. He absolutely would have died in that warehouse. It's not all that cold, there's no food, and a vehicle could have squashed him. I think I'm going to free him to a more survivable spot at Story 21. Not weird really, but pretty crazy. Way back when I was 18, I was a busser at a restaurant. It's considered one of the best and most expensive restaurants in town and has a popular patio area in the summer. Got amazing tip money from all the rich people. It's in a renovated country club building and it's attached to the old neighborhood pool. Adults only were allowed at this pool and there was no lifeguard. Just a password to get in. There was a second clubhouse and pool down the road where kids could go. The patio of the restaurant is right next to the pool area, just a little gate separating them. Pool was open till 6 p.m., but the restaurant opens at 4 p.m. Unfortunately, the restaurant had zero authority over the pool. It was never an issue until this one day. Some people had been at the pool partying all day. Empty bottles everywhere. Lady was carrying around a giant bottle of wine in the pool. Most of them left when the restaurant opened and customers started sitting at the patio. But the lady with the wine and some guys stick around. They moved over to the shallow end, which is like maybe 100 feet from the nearest table on the patio. She leaned over the edge of the pool, and they started banging in front of everyone at the patio. Everyone inside the bar area could also see them through the windows. That's where I was. The bartender ran to get the manager. Everyone had heard now and were all heading outside or crowding around the windows. It honestly wasn't too crazy until one of the women who left came back and saw them. She was apparently the dude's GF or wife. She was very drunk, but she managed to pick up one of our patio chairs and launch it into the pool. Luckily, didn't hit the people. Then wine lady threw her bottle and almost hit some customers. The guy wasn't even fazed and just stood there naked in the pool. Luckily, the police showed up quickly. One lived in the neighborhood, arrested all of them. We comped everyone's food. The pool got shut down. Also, the people didn't even live in town. They were all staying with this guy who was apparently one of the ones that left early. Old friends in town for a wedding or something. I only know because he came by the next day to apologize and help clean up. He even paid for our broken chair. I also could share multiple stories about catching people having sex in the movie theater I worked at, but those aren't as dramatic. They always left when we threatened to get the police. Story 22 was in a big meeting in a construction trailer and answer a knock on the door. Two guys look like a coop's laborers. Dirty clothes shirts have contractor names on them. Ask for a guy with a picture on a cell phone and name a company that's on site. It's a large site with a couple hundred workers, no way for me to know. Say I can go get their foreman from the meeting. At this point, one very discreetly pulls a U.S. Marshal's badge out of his front pocket. Tells me to get the foreman, but not to make any disturbances. The guy there looking fire moves substances, and apparently also finishes sheetrock for fun, I guess. Says they've got the 5-acre site surrounded, and if this guy finds out they're here, things would go bad quickly. Turns out the guy wasn't there, but still pretty weird. Story 23, Critter Day. Has to be Critter Day at the pizza place I worked at as a Ute. Hopefully a treat for anyone sorting by new. I was in the kitchen heading out to the main dining area when I saw a snake mosey on into the restaurant and head towards the kitchen. It was a small danger noodle, just a little garter guy. I brought this situation to the attention of my boss, and he told me in no uncertain terms that it was my job to get rid of it. Enjoying my new Raise-Free Snake Wrangler promotion, I returned to Sneck, and Ninja Steve Irwin grabbed him by the back of the head. I removed him from the premises and let him go. He safely slithered away and decided to check out an old drain. That would have been weird enough, but then the squirrel incident occurred. Things returned to normal. Some time passed, all was well. Suddenly, a squirrel appeared. Not just any squirrel, mind. This squirrel had, and I am dead serious here, a pink bow tied around its neck. I was taken aback, safe to say. This time the intruder made it into the kitchen, where it proceeded to more or less make a beeline for my boss. It latched onto his leg and started climbing. I distinctly remember his look of puzzlement and confusion mixed with despair. As it climbed ever higher, he kind of hunched over more and more until he looked like some sort of bizarro world pirate Quasimodo once it reached his shoulder. He sort of waddled outside like this with me in tow, and once we were outside, insisted I had to get it off him. I remember desperately hoping I'd find a tennis racket in the street or something, but no, just me and my bare ducking hands. Well, the ninja grab worked well on Snick, so I figured it might do on the squirrel as well. All I can really say is, thank God for wound-up 18-year-old reflexes. Somehow, my plan to grab a ducking, agitated squirrel by the back of the neck before it could react actually worked. However, once my big, beefy mitt clamped down on it, its little legs and paws went into squirrel hypervelocity mode. Let me tell you, their little squirrel claws are pretty sharp. Thankfully, it couldn't really reach far enough back to get me. But I still had a wriggling pound of fury in my hand, so I jogged a couple steps and gently tossed it to the ground. It landed on its feet, turned on and looked at me, quivering with indignation. I really wanted to remind her it's shaking its little fist at me, but I'm afraid that might be wishful thinking. That was Critter Day. Story 24. I worked custodial in a dorm building on my university campus, where I was in charge of the 4th floor, which stunk because it was one of the only buildings without elevators. One day I walk into the bathroom to clean it and notice that they've taped an out of order sign on one of the shower stalls. I figure it's a hair clog, pretty common in a girl's dorm. So I grab my gloves and the clog puller, pull back the curtain, and see a full-sized couch stood on end, just chilling in the shower stall. I legitimately did a double and triple take where I closed the curtain, opened it, closed it, opened it, because I honestly thought I was losing my dang mind. I kept trying to leave the bathroom to go get someone to help me, but running back in to check, I wasn't seeing things. Because never in a million years did I think I'd see a couch in a shower, let alone on the 4th floor in a building with no elevators. I went downstairs and found my boss, and all I could say was, "There's a couch in the shower." It took me 3 times of repeating myself before she seemed to realize what the crap I was talking about. And as we walk all the way up the stairs, I just keep thinking about how this couch is probably going to be gone by the time we get there. And she's going to have me committed. But no, it was still there, and we just stared at it in silence together for a good minute or two. Then we had to haul it all the way down the stairs. The real kicker is that while we assumed it had come from the little lounge area on the 2nd floor, nothing was missing from there. So we assumed the lobby on the 1st floor. Nope, this was a couch from the mostly hidden basement lounge in a building with no elevators. How these girls got that beast all the way up the stairs without getting spotted by anyone in an authority position, I'll never know. Why they wanted to do it is even more a mystery. Why a couch? Why the shower? We as custodians had never even really interacted with the residents. We were just cleaning staff, and we did our job well. So were they pranking us? If trying to prank each other, why put the out of order sign up? Were they saving it for later or something? Why a basement couch? Just why? It is a mystery that remains unsolved, and I am forever haunted by that shower couch. Story 25. So I work at a warehouse for auto parts. Part-time since I'm still in school, but get a lot of hours on the weekend. And on a Friday night, I was normally working as usual. I went to go clock out, as it was time to leave, and overheard my co-workers talking, so I went to go join the conversation as they noticed me and asked me to hear the story. So one of them was opening up the store one day and heard voices coming from the warehouse part of the store. He investigated it and there was nothing. The guy is a little weird and believes in ghosts. So I thought that it was the place next door, which was just connected by one wall, so you can hear what is going on the other side of the wall. The next morning on Saturday, I arrive early to get more hours since I'm only working part-time and have to open up. I know what to do since I do it every Saturday. I open up as usual, nothing out of the ordinary. As I'm opening the warehouse up, I hear a knock on the storefront door. 2 entrances, one for customers and one for employees. I come in through the employee door. So I go to check it out, and there were 2 officers there, and I was really suspicious of why they were there. I asked them why they were there. They said that the alarm had went off for the place because the alarm goes off when someone gets in the building without resetting the alarm. I told them that it may have just been me, but they got the call earlier than I got there and needed to search the place. I called my boss to confirm it, just to make sure they weren't fake officers or some, and he said to let them in. I let them in and they told me to unlock the warehouse, in which I did, and the lights have a set timer, so they didn't go on until an hour later. They tell me to wait outside and wait. About 15 minutes later, a police car shows up with 2 more officers, and so one went in and the other came to talk to me. The officer said that there was a homeless man living in our warehouse every night. I was astonished that could have happened. Still a crazy story we tell all the new workers when they start working. Story 26. Back when I worked in Manhattan at a high-end car customization shop, we had a customer, James, who we trusted and occasionally wanted to do small jobs on his own car. We would let him use our tools since he was cool. One day, my coworker and James were there after hours, with James working on his Jeep on the sidewalk and coworker working on his motorcycle. Coworker has to leave and just tells James to bring the few tools he was using back tomorrow. While James was working on the sidewalk and the shop all closed up, Out comes Dusty, the friendly neighborhood crackhead. Now, a little backstory on James. He was raised sheltered as all duck and is about as naive as they come. Dusty asked James to borrow $20 and promised that he would pay him back. James, being the clueless idiot that he is, actually gave it to him. Turns out James somehow didn't realize that. Dusty is a homeless crackhead and will most definitely not be bringing your $20 back. It was getting late, and James was wrapping up when Dusty actually came back and told him something along the lines of, "Sorry, man, I don't have your $20, but I can smoke you up if you want." James, thinking he meant a nice little bowl of weed, agreed and followed Dusty into the body shop next door where they both snuck into the bathroom. This is where things get interesting, but I'm sure you already know what's coming. Dusty whips out a crack pipe, drops a rock in it, and hits it. James is shell-shocked at what just happened to the point where he freezes up and doesn't know what to do. Dusty hands him the pipe, and since James is in such a state and is beyond polite, actually hit the crack pipe out of fear that he would offend Dusty. James came back the next morning, losing his mind about how the local crackhead bum tricked him into smoking crack with him. So yeah, that's how one of our customers ended up sneaking into a neighboring business's bathroom with an addict to unknowingly smoke rock. Funny enough, Dusty came by 20 minutes later, looking for scrap metal in our dumpster, which made for more laughs, while James didn't know what to say again. Story 27. I work the front desk at night at an ER. Most of the time it's quiet and slow. This night was not. A lady appearing to be in her early 40s hobbled in, seemingly drunk or on something. She came up to the desk and asked if I would stop her if she took a wheelchair. I just looked at her, confused, and asked if she needed to be seen. That question apparently threw her into rage mode. Duck, no, I don't want to be seen. I just need a wheelchair. You think I want to be seen at this place? Duck this place. I'm taking that wheelchair and rolling myself over to the other hospital. The other hospital is 15 minutes away, and that's driving time. I'm alone and kind of scared of how she might react if I say, well, anything really, so I just laughed and told her that I wouldn't be chasing her down if she took a wheelchair. Then she started asking my name. She told me she'd make me rich if I told her my name and pretended that Marshall Mathers was checked into the hospital. Yes, she meant Eminem. Just look at that screen and tell me he's here. Just pretend. This is the best show I've ever been on. I'll act crazy and they'll see it and you'll be rich. You know, undercover boss, just tell me he's here. I know he's here. I did not do this, but she insisted I do it for long enough that security eventually came out and intervened. She started going in on him, sang for us both, tried to take the wheelchair because she wanted to sit and smoke in it, and then IDK what happened outside, but she came fuming in, saying she needed to be seen immediately and knew her rights and blah, blah, blah. She never actually went out for a cigarette. She just kept arguing with the security guard in the doorway. So when the nurses came up, she argued with them about letting her go smoke. She ended up going outside, circling the building and trying to get in other doors, and finally made her way to a picnic table, stood on it, and rapped for the better part of 20 minutes. She was never actually seen in the ER. About 2 hours into the madness, 3 different cars showed up to get her. Story 28. A large, heavy-set man falling down a set of stairs, what seemed to be in slow motion, and once he got to bottom, he screamed, "My balls!" Then he got up, picked up whatever fried snack he was eating, and casually walked away as if it never happened. Story 29. I was visiting our warehouse, which looked pretty standard as all things go. Tall shelves loaded with pallets, conveyor belts and forklifts going to and fro, burly men and women in high-vis attire pottering about. When all of a sudden, a song broke out over the pay system, and every single person started dancing. Their expressions didn't change. They didn't stop what they were doing or where they were going. They all just danced as they went about their business. A few seconds later, the music stopped and they resumed normal existence. It was so bizarre, like they had been brainwashed to respond to the music and didn't recognize their own conditioning. Turns out that's all part of their ergonomics program. Every so often, the music starts up and they're meant to move about as a form of stretching. Story 30. I'm a pizza delivery driver for a small local pizza place. I had one guy call to place an order. He says it's 1332 so-and-so road. Okay, cool. Then he calls a bit later to say it's actually not that street address. It's the same house number, but on a different street. Okay, whatever, dude. So I take the delivery to the street, he said. But the houses on that street ended at like 1280, and he was at 1332. So I call him, and he says that it's actually a different 3rd street. So I check my map and I see that the street I'm on and the one he's now telling me about are essentially the same street, just separated by some kind of barrier. So I go around the block and find the street he's on. It's basically an alley. So I find the house and he apologizes because he's from out of town in an Airbnb, so he's not familiar with the area. The front of the house is on a very busy street, he says, so it makes way more sense to come in the back alley/street instead of the front. No worries, it's all good. He gives me a nice tip and I go back to the store. So I take my next delivery, and it's going to 1328 so-and-so place, the same street name as the first guy initially told me, but place instead of road. I get there, but the house numbers end at 770, and I'm looking for 1328. So I call the guy, and he says no, the address is on so-and-so road. But he's actually on the street I had just taken the last delivery to because his house is on a very busy road, and it's just easier to come in the back alley street. Literally almost verbatim what the last guy had said. Turns out that two back-to-back deliveries ordered within minutes of each other. Initially had the wrong address. I had to call them both for clarification, and they both directed me to the same little alley because their houses were 2 houses apart on a busy road, and it really is just easier to come in the back way. They don't know each other. Story 31. I worked at a grocery, and one evening near closing, another employee walks up to me with a distraught man in tow. She asks if I think I can help him. I had recently seen this guy coming in the grocery store and recognized him, so I agreed. He's in his early 20s, tells me he has just moved here, deep East Texas, from the Middle East to an apartment, sight unseen, but that he is beginning to fear for his life. I ask him where he lives and why he's in fear for his life. He tells me the apartment complex, which is a really seedy place, he decided to move to, which happens to have been owned by a gentleman I grew up going to church with. Let's call him Idiot. He moved to our small town when I was young and became something of the local slumlord. There were always rumors that he was in with some shady dealings as a lot of substances and trafficking comes through our small town. Just recently, he had sold off all his properties and disappeared. So the disheveled gentleman goes on that apparently he has moved into the former business office of Idiot. Idiot had been using one of the apartments as his office. The disheveled gentleman knows this because he has been getting mail addressed to Idiot. Earlier that night, several masked, armed men came and kicked in the door to this guy's apartment. They rough him up and interrogate him about the whereabouts. So I tell the guy he should contact the police, but apparently the armed men had told him they were in with the police all the way up to the chief and had friends in high places all over the county. This guy is too scared to even go to the cops. In a small town like this, it's not out of the realm of possibility, and I tell the guy to get the hell out of Dodge. Never saw him again. Story 32. So I used to work at a small grocery store, and one day my boss says he wants to show me something on the camera, and I'm like, bet all right, and follow him up to the office. There's a couple other people there, and we all gather around as my boss hits play on a tape from the day before. There's an old man walking through the produce department, and all of a sudden, we see him stop, reach around, pat his ass, and then shake his leg until a ball of crap plops out onto the floor. He then panics and tries to kick it under a produce display, but accidentally steps on it and smears it all on the rug we put in front of the displays. Then he decides that's good enough and just continues shopping and then leaves without telling anyone or buying adult diapers. We also had a lady 2 days later who was a known alcoholic steal 2 small bottles of wine by drinking both of them in the store bathroom and then hiding the bottles very visibly behind the toilet where my manager could see them. This same woman was also known for buying copious amounts of vanilla extract, like 9 bottles at a time, so that she could drink them in her car to get a buzz. I swear, grocery stores are one of the best places to find some wild people. Story 33. One Monday morning at 8 a.m., there was a frog in the lobby. Not a small frog either, a big frog. The front doors were still locked and it was Monday morning, so we had no idea how the little guy got into the lobby. He would have had to have hopped all the way from the back of the building to get to the lobby. Story 34. Working at a graphic design studio in the early 90s, I had a really crafty, alcoholic boss. He was known for his rages and mean attitude. He also thought he was a stud with the ladies too, but in reality was just gross and smarmy. Women hated him. On some client meetings, I would have to go with him either for moral support or because I actually knew what we were selling, unlike him. So there's this big meeting coming up where we're going to try to impress the female owner of this big company and get her business. Now, this boss had a nasty habit of picking his nose all the time. He'd try to do it on the sly, but everyone who worked there had caught him at it a few times. On this day, he's waiting in his car for me to get in, and he's picking away doing some deep mining, but when I get in, he stops. Except, lo and behold, there's this giant, evil, gross booger stuck to the end of his nose, and he doesn't know it's there. And because I hate this drunken git, I'm not saying a damn thing about it. Sorry, dude. You're on your own with your treasure. So on, we go to the meeting, and the whole way there, picture me smiling slyly while watching this lovely booger on his nose. We get into the meeting, and the woman is horrified. I can tell that she is, but she's trying to cover, and I'm just smiling away, doing my best to explain our business to her. My boss finally excuses himself toward the end of the meeting to use their restroom. When he comes out, his whole head is beet red, and he's pissed. We leave and drive in silence the whole way back. Needless to say, we did not get that client. I left that horrible place a few months later, and they closed down after that. Last I heard, the horrible nose-picking alcoholic was traveling around the country trying to find work. Story 35. I used to manage the front desk of a hotel. Our biggest client was a tour company from China. So for most of the year, we were packed with groups of 50 people who didn't speak a word of English. The only person who ever spoke English was the tour guide, and they were always different. There were plenty of annoyances that you could expect when the tours were in town, but they definitely left me with some great stories. I was at the front desk, and it was a relatively quiet night. This older Chinese guy comes up to the desk and yells a few things at me in Chinese. This was usually their first course of action. Once he realized that we couldn't understand one another, he grabbed a pen and paper and doodled some Chinese characters that I again could not understand. He proceeded to play a short game of charades from which I deduced he was trying to ask about the pool, which at the time was closed. I told him, sorry, unfortunately the pool is closed until Memorial Day. He walked away frustrated, and I assumed that was the end of it. About 20 minutes later, the gentleman returned with the tour guide. She could not stop laughing as she was telling me his issue. So apparently this guy had been washing his underwear in his room and took them outside and hung them from a tree branch to dry. When he went back to get them, they were gone. I told her that I didn't have any extra underwear for him, but the best I could do was go look outside to see if I could find them. We were both laughing hysterically, and we never found his underwear. I don't know which is weirder, leaving your underwear in a tree or taking underwear that you found in a tree. Story 36. At the time, I was working at an animation studio. It's a very unassuming building in California. No labels or anything on the outside, just looks like a plain warehouse or office. One day I was driving back from lunch and I saw a car labeled Coroner turn the corner from the street my building was on, and as I went inside to get back to work on the second floor, people were all staring out of this wall of windows near where our cubicles started. It turned out that someone had driven a car from Tennessee all the way out to California and lost 3 men there, stashed them in the car, and left the car directly behind our building, where we usually held Taco Tuesdays. We had a full view of everything that was going on from our second floor windows, crime scene tape, and all. I had seen that vehicle parked in that exact spot a day before, but its windows had been all fogged over. They didn't take out the bodies that we could see. They actually put the entire car onto a truck and hauled it off. It was really surreal, but I'm really into true crime, so I was excited to hear my favorite murder talk about it on that week's episode. Story 37. Our office shares a bathroom with the dental office next door. The dentist is a weirdo. I'll walk in and he will jump like he was doing something he wasn't supposed to. There are other things, but he comes off as slimy. Story 38. I work at a small fancy Chinese restaurant, and last night me and my friend went in to go visit some coworkers. We went in at the time where it was slowing down so much that the servers had time to sit and chat. We have a music system that will play CDs quietly over speakers throughout the restaurant. At one point, when we had finished eating, me and my friend hear a piano, and I think to myself, wow, these speakers are loud. But only after turning my head to the right to investigate, I see a keyboard. Someone managed to bring an entire keyboard into this restaurant. Me and my friend give each other a confused look, only to be followed by the party, taking up half of one of 3 dining rooms. Beginning to sing choir music, me, my friend, and some coworkers proceed to burst out laughing. Story 39. 2 things come to mind from when I worked at a department store in college. A woman came into the store, went through the perfume aisle, took a few bottles into the layaway storage room, and drank them. This was all right before closing, maybe 10 minutes or so. Watching this on camera was one of the funniest things I've ever seen. Some dude came in strumming a banjo as he followed his sew around as she shopped. I and all of my coworkers searched for someone with a camera to see if it was some sort of gag, but nope. Dude just walked the aisles with his girl playing the banjo to keep himself occupied. Story 40. My first manager used to slap everybody's ass when he first saw them on any given day. Not lightly either, like a full-blown smack. I literally had a red mark for a few hours once. Needless to say, he didn't last long. Story 41. Coworker came in and found a chunk of his desk missing. After investigating, we found a bullet and a bullet hole above his desk. I ended up on the roof patching the hole. No idea who decided to shoot our building in the middle of the night. Story 42. Used to work at a grocery store for 5 years. Seen some weird crap one. When working the night shift, 12 a.m. to 8 a.m., a police officer randomly shows up at like 2 to 3 a.m. asking for manager. Since I was a day guy, I technically outranked the night manager even though I wasn't a manager. So I had to deal with it. Apparently, there was a guy who was sleeping in his car in the parking lot, and the cop wanted to know if it was okay for him to be there. Here's the kicker. It was another employee. 2. Walked into a guy taking a crap in the urinal and wiping it on the walls. 3. Found a thing of sausage under a cash register that was there for at least a month. Was swollen 3 times the size of a fresh package. Didn't smell until we cut it open. And many more. Left that job out of college and now work as a mechanic at a car dealership. The weirdest thing I've seen there was another mechanic using a cutting torch to light a cigarette caused a safety meeting the next day. Story 43. I work in a rehab center for adults with brain injuries. There are so many stories it's hard to pick one. I have an 88-year-old woman assigned to me. She has dementia and an intracerebral bleed on top of that. Now as I'm taking her case history, building rapport, I ask about her family, which she happily tells me about, but within minutes becomes suspicious. Why do you care about my family? In the most accusatory tone. Just getting to know you, Mrs. R, as we'll be working together for the coming weeks. Next question. What does your room at the old age home look like? She begins wailing, I'm on the 9th floor, over and over again, until she is distracted by needing the toilet. I help her there with her walking frame and some physical assistance for balance. Pretty creepy considering the 9th floor is a euphemism for at death's door. During the night, she managed to get out of her bed and climb into her roommate's bed across the room, while poor Mrs. J is still in it. Mrs. J has aphasia and can't speak or call for help, and her emergency bell has fallen on the floor. She manages to speed dial her husband, who calls nursing, who then run in to find Mrs. R and Mrs. J sharing a single hospital bed with the sides up. Mrs. R passed away 2 hours later after being escorted to her own bed. Story 44. A few years ago, I hosted kittens from the local animal shelter that I was on the board for. We had a full condo cage up in the front windows of the store. My store opened at 10 a.m., and normally I got in at 9:30 to open up, get ready, etc. I was running late, so it was 9:55 when I got there. I opened the doors, turned on the sign, and started the computer. The kitten was running around the store, having a blast. Lady walks in, and at the same moment, kitten runs up from the back and slides to his cage, jumps in, and starts to take a crap. Now, him having been there all night alone, there was one poop and one pee already in the litter box that I was walking over to clean. Lady looks at me, scoffs, and tells me that it's pathetic that the cat is living in filth and confined with so much feces and urine in his cage. It's a freestanding 2-story cat condo. So she scoops up the poop, pee, and waits for the cat to finish pooping the second one as the cats all bulge. I looking like, WTF is this woman doing? And she comes back towards me and tells me I should be ashamed of myself, and walked out with a handful of cat crap. No idea where she went, never saw her again, and there's no bathroom on site for her to wash her hands, etc. Story 45. We had an addict living in our attic for weeks without us knowing. One day, he fell through the ceiling in the dry storage, locked eyes with the head chef sitting at his desk, and then just booked it out of there. On his way down, the dude knocked down a shelf, ducked up our can rack, broke our AC, and then kicked a hole in the drywall for good measure. We've been coming in at 8 a.m. to find dishes in the sink, fryers and grills left on, food missing, etc. We figured it was just the night crew coming in for a snack. It's terrifying to think of how long he was up there without us knowing. Some guys had even gone up to get stuff, walked right past him without noticing. Story 46. I worked kennel for a few years. Overnight, I had to call my boss if anything happened to any of the dogs. A little over a year ago, the night of New Year's Day, I did my 10 p.m. hourly check on the dogs and passed a dachshund who had a little fuzzy red blanket to sleep on. All was well. I started setting up runs for incoming dogs the next day and passed the doxy again about half an hour later. The blanket was gone, except for a few shreds of it around his mouth he was chewing on. Had to call my boss and explain to her that this dog ate his entire bed and needed to go to the vet immediately. She had just woken up and was so ducking incredulous and grilling me the entire time I was on the phone with her. The dog was fine. They induced vomiting, but this blanket was about the same size as the dog. The entire time my boss was at the emergency vet, I was questioning if that really just happened. That's how I learned dachshunds are prone to pica. Story 47. I worked at a diner where the kids of the original owner, who died 3 years before this incident, owned and ran the place. It was slam busy, and I was the only cashier/host on staff, so I was sprinting around the place and asking the customers for patience. As I was running from the back to the front end to seat the next guest, I saw someone from the corner of my eye stand up from the breakfast bar area and run my direction to help out. I thought it was the current owner since he was wearing the baking uniform he normally wears on cupcake making day. I turn and go to thank him for jumping in, but the dude disappears as soon as I look at him. I asked a waitress if I was high, and they asked if he jumped up from the end seat, and I said yes. They told me that's where the original owner used to sit, and he was jumping in to help me out like he would have if he was alive. Apparently all of them have seen the ghost around the store helping, and they all love and miss him. Story 48. A long time ago, I had a job working for the county road department. One day I'm riding shotgun with this one guy, filling potholes or cutting weeds or whatever. He stops the truck on the side of the road next to a strawberry field. A car pulls up and parks behind us. It's one of the girlfriends he was juggling at the time. He says if anyone calls on the radio to just say he'll be right back. Then they go into the strawberry field and proceed to start having sex. A few minutes later, our boss pulls up. He asks me WTF is going on and where's so-and-so. I just said, I don't know, and etc. I see the dude and his GF running back toward us. She's pulling her shirt over her head, and he's limping and all doubled over. He gets back to the truck and fesses up, then explains that he has a severe abrasion on his junk and needs medical attention. The boss says okay, and the dude drives the truck back to the yard, punches out, and leaves. He ended up getting sent to addiction therapy for 30 days, paid. True story. Story 49. This lady I work with is bat crap crazy, like used to scream and throw people's things, crazy. One day I came back to my cubicle aisle, it's just me in the aisle, and she's fully getting fitted in a nice gown. I stop and turn to leave, and she's like, no, come back. How do my boobs look in this? It's for my son's wedding. I was like, good. She came into work 4 hours late and had her cousin come to hem her dress at work. So anyways, I'm trying to ignore this, and I go back to work. About an hour later, she walks past me fully clothed in her work clothes, like she completely changed in the middle of the office. It was bizarre, to say the least. Story 50. Work in a small department that's not related to anything medical at all. Someone left 4 vials of blood, like the sealed kind from a phlebotomy lab. In our lost and found, had someone leave a flyer on our departmental billboard. And the semester isn't over until you've happened across a homeless person furiously do HJ in public. Weird crap happened. Story 51. I work with industrial furnaces. The parts coming out of the end are roughly 400 degrees Fahrenheit before going through the cooling station for removal. We had a guy whose job description did not include handling these parts that had been with us for a few months and knew full well how hot they were. He decided to go to the end of the furnace and went to pick up a part, fresh out. Someone nearby warned him, "Hey, careful, those parts are really hot." To which said guy replied, "They aren't that hot, watch," and proceeded to pick up a part and place it against his forearm. It burned in well enough that he had to pry it off, ended up lying about the situation and got fired. 8 months later, he sent one of my coworkers a picture of the burn mark, and it was still detailed enough that I could tell you exactly what part he burned himself with. This was the same guy that, shortly after being hired, started making comments about how easily someone could place a body part inside of the furnace and hurt themselves. So maybe we should have seen some red flags waving around him somewhere before this incident. Story 52. I'm an elementary school teacher, so you can imagine how many random things I see and hear on a daily basis. But for whatever reason, the first one that comes to mind involves a second grader. Said little one was famous for losing just one shoe. Not for like 2 minutes, but sometimes for half of a day. Our staff chat often had messages like, "Hey, lost his left shoe. Colors are black and gray. Be on the lookout." Definitely got some giggles out of those. Well, one day I happened to be on deck to walk through campus with him and look for the shoe. We were looking everywhere. The field where he played soccer, at lunch, inside and outside his classroom, in nearby trash cans, you name it. After 30 minutes of looking, kid starts to lose hope. I happen to look at some of the beautiful trees by our front gate, and what do you know? One single shoe stuck up a tree about 6 feet up. Kid was thrilled upon questioning, had no idea how it got up there. Happy kid, happy parents. Super weird experience. Story 53. I used to work in a building that overlooked a medium-sized river. One day, my coworkers and I got to observe a river rescue of a guy who fell in and was having problems getting out. It was pretty fast water that day. Story 54. I used to serve in a maximum security mental health facility. I have seen lots, unfortunately. The one that sticks out the most happened when I was pretty fresh to the gig. I was assigned to the assessment ward for the meal. Generally, you bring up a cart of trays with already portioned meals, some of them specific for specific patients. Some of them had a choice between 2 different meals, not important though. So I bring this cart up, set up in the hall where all the doors for the rooms are, and the guards feed the patients that have to stay in their room and let the ones out that can be let out. They line up and I hand them the corresponding tray as they pass. Everything is going smoothly when I look up, and directly across from where I'm serving, there's this skinny kid looking at me. I look up and make eye contact, and I can see him bobbing around a bit. I looked at the nurse, thinking he may be having an episode or something. Nope, just pulling his pud while dead staring me in the eyes. Story 55 was at technical school, but I had that friend who was setting up a firewall for schools of the region. It meant that he had to check if sites were blocked. They were not. Most striking is having my friend and our teacher behind him looking these sites during class. The good old days. Story 56. I watched a grown man scream at an old woman like a tantruming child, shove another man into the wall, steal a laptop, almost run over someone who tried to get the laptop back, then briefly run from police, which resulted in us having to lock down the building for the day because the guy threatened to make us pay. That was a morning, but really working at a Fox station, not news, but airing American Idol, Top Model, etc., was where I saw the really weird crap happen. Watched a squirrel get fried, on the electric pole outside and knock out the whole station's power for several hours. So many angry NASCAR fans. Listened to a man tell our programming head that he hopes she gets cancer. Watched a grown-ass adult assault our tiny 5'0" 0-inch secretary because a NASCAR race had been canceled. Dealt with not one but 2 bomb threats. Get to meet the people from the office, but not know who they are because I didn't watch. Ended up being teased about it for a while. I probably could write even more fun stories about crap that went down there. Story 57. My old office had these giant floor-to-ceiling windows that would get washed every month or so. One month, the window washer was outside the window I faced with a long pole to wash the second-story windows. He let it fall away from the building too far, and it hit a power line right in front of us. We all thought we had watched him pass, but he ended up getting into the ambulance unassisted to go get checked out. Story 58. I worked in a section of a department store that had a sofa and a couple comfy chairs for customers to use. One day, a rumpled old man came in and sat down on one of the chairs and fell asleep. We thought that he may have been homeless, so we didn't want to disturb him. The funny thing was that every time after he fell asleep, his cell phone would ring, but he didn't answer it because he was asleep. He would wake up periodically, but his phone never rang when he was awake, only when he was asleep. We thought that was kind of funny. He sat there for hours. Finally, his son showed up and said that he had been trying to find his father, who had wandered off. It was he who was trying to call the old man. The son was angry because he said his father was a diabetic and could have died. He blamed us instead of taking responsibility for losing his father at a mall. Story 59. I was having a conversation with 2 coworkers during lunch. A third was sitting at his desk minding his own business. Suddenly, this third guy shot to his feet, lifted the little guy I was talking to over his head and held him there. He set him back down and returned to his seat as if it had never happened. The 3 of us were shaken and had thought the bully was doing to body slam the little guy. We all reported it and got told it was horseplay and not to ever mention it again. It ducked up the little guy for a long time, and I was pretty scared of the bully myself. This was at a VA hospital, and they absolutely do not protect their employees. Story 60. I guess I was locking up my office after class at 11 a.m. in broad daylight, and I get to the stairs and see a dude with no home laying there with all of his things, blocking the way. I ask him kindly if he works there, and he says no, and I tell him unfortunately, he's blocking the way for my students to get in the office. At this point, I'm next to him, and he starts scream-spitting on my face, grabs me, and tries to push me down the stairs. I told him, if I'm going down those stairs, you're going first. Get the duck out of here. And he packed his crap and left fast. Use your parent voice. It works so much better than being nice. I'm going hard next time. Fellow office mates were freaking out. Duck that guy and all his crap in my stairwell. I wish that wasn't a true story. I went home and drowned in Purell. His nasty spit was all over from screaming at me. Hey. Story 61. Had an internship organized by my college. Was the weirdest company and taught me to organize my own in the future. Some things I experienced. On my first day, I was surprised to see one of the marketing people started the day at 10:30 with an alcoholic beverage. One day I walked in on a strategy board meeting where the board were all high as a kite. My internship mentor was the husband of the owner and CCO of a part of the organization, but the owner was having an affair with the CEO of the company, and my mentor was being pushed out of the company. The jobs I got during the internship were also way below a normal internship standard. They had me order picking for half of the day, for example. But when I complained about it at my uni, they sided with the company and told me I would fail my internship if I wouldn't help around in the company. Great learning experiences all around. Story 62. Someone tried to end life because she had ducked up an assignment and figured she'd get canned from the gig. I had to comfort her. She had an epic nervous breakdown in my arms. I have Asperger's. Having a woman scream, moan, and babble hysterically into my ears for an hour is hellacious for me. She nearly drove me into a panic attack and made me want to hit myself. I got a massive adrenaline attack from it. It lasted for hours. Get this. I had to fix her assignment for her while dragging her along with me. I was simultaneously picking up items in the store and telling her, "Don't worry, Jennifer. You won't get fired. You'll be fine. Here, let me pat your arm. Oh, Jennifer, now you are almost having a seizure and falling onto the conveyor belt and freaking out the cashier. Don't do that, Jennifer." People were staring at us as though we had landed from the moon. One of the bizarrest experiences of my life. Story 63. I used to work in landscaping and in the winter would do snow removal. My boss hired a lot of Craigslist randos for snow shoveling. And because it's Craigslist, you got all kinds of people. The weirdest incident I can remember was this guy working with my boss and I when a police car pulled up. The cop talked to the guy for a minute and then arrested him. Apparently, the guy was on parole and had one of those ankle monitors that track your blood alcohol level. As he was getting led away, he yelled to my boss, "I had some beers before I came out. I was nervous. Please don't fire." Me. Never saw that dude again. Story 64. I worked at a restaurant years ago. We were having trouble keeping kitchen staff at the time. So they hired this guy, I don't remember his name, but we will call him Tom. He was just a weird dude. Every day he would go into basement cooler, mix like 6 raw eggs, some milk, and other stuff together and just drink it, without asking anyone if he could have it. He would wash dishes super fast, but stare intently at the wall behind the dishwasher. One day he told me he eats a bowl of mushrooms before work and went on to talk about all these things he sees in the wall. There were some weird people there, but I'm pretty sure he was the dude who also tried to sell another guy a junk enlargement supplement. At this same restaurant, I had a lady cry, like sob cry, because I told her our pastas had garlic in them. Story 65. I work with aircraft, and one morning on the flight line, we found a pass rabbit. About a week later, we found another, then another. After a while, my bosses took notice and believed that it was some psycho on night shift hit rabbits and launched an investigation into it because they were sure it must have been a person due to them having such clean wound and never finding the bodies. Then one day in the wee hours of the morning, we found the culprits. Owls. Story 66. My second day of work at my current job, and a random lady outside hit by a FedEx truck. Not at all the driver's fault, as she stepped out in between parked cars on a notoriously winding road and not at a crosswalk. Thankfully, I work in a physician's office, literally across the street from the hospital. Several of the physicians went running down to assist. The woman lived after being airlifted to a bigger hospital in a larger city, but definitely lost at least one limb. A medical assistant came in, asked what was happening, and the physician looked out, said, "Oh, looks like my colleagues are saving someone," and went back to dictation. Story 67. Once had a guy call 911, and the police responded because we wouldn't give him anything but ice chips. I work in a hospital, and he was having surgery the next morning. Story 68. Sitting at my cubicle, heard a woman say, "Oh," and turned around. She was crapting all over the floor. She was on her way to the bathroom, didn't make it in time, and just crap all down her out of her dress, all over the floor. The look on her face made me feel so bad for her. But we got to go home, and nobody ever spoke of it again, except there was a stain on the carpet. Story 69. I used to be the front desk manager of 2 hotels simultaneously, owned by the same guy, but portrayed publicly as 2 separate hotels. To save money, he had one set of administrative staff and then a suite of front desk agents for each. I was in charge of training, troubleshooting, and handling both. One of my agents, a lovely small mouthy lady who will remain nameless, spent a good 30 to 40 minutes counting out her drawer. I was consumed with other duties, or I would have helped her sooner. But when I finally did notice that it was taking her a while, I asked what was wrong. I keep coming up short. I counted for her and it came up right. She counted it again, short. This time she wrote them down. I checked the paper, I'll never know how, but she somehow counted 55 cents in dimes and 74 cents in quarters. Still baffles me. Story 70. About 6 years ago, I had to reinforce a bunch of double-ended sex toys so they could be brandished like swords by soldiers in Lysistrata. A few of my male colleagues tried to help, but the only way to do it was to shove lengths of steel rod down the middle of them until they were centered, and their hands just wouldn't cooperate. The rod slipped and hit the sight on one of them, and the poor guy fainted. What is the NSFW moment you had at work? Story 1. I work at a cinema. A few years back, there was an animated Nutcracker film that was getting basically no business. 2 customers went in to see it, clearly thinking it would be dead enough to fool around. Turns out the day they went, it was packed out. Guess it was the only Christmas film on or something. But they decided to take the risk anyway, and the woman starts to give a hand job to her partner. Customer comes out, lets me know. I go in and have to bollock the couple. As I was walking to the screen, I kept thinking to myself, this is so awkward. What do I say? What do I do if they keep going? And there's going to be families watching me tell off someone for having sex. I get into the screen, go up to the couple, and without thinking said, I know these people paid to see a Nutcracker, but I don't think this is what they had in mind. Story 2. When I had sex with my boss's daughter in the back of the restaurant. Her father was the chef and owner. She was learning culinary. I was in charge of serving the party room while training the new waiters and waitresses. Oftentimes we had to go to the back of the party room to pack away the leftover food or cake from the party. Alcohol as well. Or we just kept extra storage in there. Tables, cloths, etc. The party room was separate from the pizza room, and the pizza room was separate from the restaurant side. It started with something simple. Her back needed to be cracked. So I stood behind her, pulled her arms back so she arched, and I got some cracks out of her. Common sense. She backed up into me while I pushed forward into her. All in the name of science, of course. She joked around and said, imagine if somebody walked in here now. And I laughed and said, oh, totally. Me behind you as I pull your arms back. We chuckled for a few seconds. Then awkward silence. She took off her pants and lowered them enough while I became the Flash and instantly unzipped my pants as well. It was a moment of just silence and agreement. We only ducked for like 10 minutes at most, until we heard her dad call for her. I climbed a random shelf and started reaching for tablet cloths and threw 2 of them at her to grab. While I reached for the 3rd one, So when her father opened the door, it was just me passing her tablet cloths to change the tables. I left that place many years ago. Occasionally went there a few times to grab a quick lunch since it's not far from my current job. I see her pictures on the walls, the framed newspaper and stuff involving her. She is a chef now. Her dad helped her get started in a business. We saw each other a few times. Simple hellos. I'm glad to see she's doing well. Story 3. I used to be a manager at a dollar theater and used to attract some odd ones. We caught a couple going at it during a movie. Manager called the cops, and when they showed up, all the employees ran upstairs to watch the drama from the projection booth. Coworker cracked a joke, and we all started laughing. The couple and cops looked up, and the cops started laughing. Another time, we caught 2 random ducking in our stockroom. Dude looked up and said, "Can you give us 5 minutes?" Story 4. I managed a Hollister Co. clothing store for a short period of time ages ago. It was easy and I needed a job as I figured out my life post-military. I didn't mind dating, flirting, or even a little discreet PDA on the clock, but in the year I was there, I fired no less than 10 people for having sex in the changing room, tool closet, and inventory room. We would do entire sales floor rebuilds overnight. For anyone unfamiliar, Hollister is owned by Abercrombie and Fitch. Back then, it leaned very heavily into the ultra-low-rise jeans and tight tank tops with bra straps as an accessory type of look. The only real job requirements were about 80% looks and 20% ability to fold clothes. It was basically a hormone-filled pit of 20-year-olds soaked in whatever fragrance we were selling, whose job it was to sell clothes via appeal. As a 28-year-old married prior military guy put in charge of all of this, it was both a hilarious and extremely uncomfortable place to work at times. I was there for about 1.5 years and then started a career. Story 5. Context matters. I graduated with a degree in advertising. Kind of always wanted to do that, but didn't want to move to a major metropolitan area to get a start in it. But everywhere I've lived won't hire someone who doesn't have loads of experience, so I haven't ever gotten to really do that for work. One job I've worked at, I was helping a nonprofit that helped care for persons with developmental and intellectual disability. The state mandated that they find external employment and that we close the sheltered workshop that we had been using to give them the ability to have a job in an environment they would be supported in. We had 2 years to close the workshop, and my job was to find a way to get as many of the people in the workshop placed in jobs in the community. So what I did was created job training centers where we could test and train them to do jobs in the community. One of the centers was a simulated hotel bedroom where we could teach them to clean and turn over hotel rooms. Another one that I had was an idea to have a thrift shop so I could teach them to run registers, stock, conduct inventory, bag groceries, and whatnot. To supply the store, we solicited basically to pick up unwanted items left after yard sales. So we got a good influx of items to sell, and after training a few of the individuals, we decided to open the store and let them work with actual customers. So we decided to make some flyers to put up to advertise it. Engage advertising degree, me. So amongst things donated to the thrift store, I found a silky leopard print bathrobe, a random flower arrangement, and a giant teddy bear that said, "I love you." So I put on the robe, went to the hotel setup, and laid across the bed in a seductive manner with the bear covering my crotch area and flowers in hand, and had a coworker take a picture to caption with, "You never know what you'll find at the thrift store." One of the female coworkers who understood my sense of humor yelled, "Oh, baby," and sprinted and dove on top of me. The whole bed crashed. All these developmentally disabled people had the biggest roaring laughter outbreaks. It amused almost everybody. I say almost because my boss did not find it funny at all, and chewed both of us out. I didn't regret it though. The people I was there to help honestly didn't get a lot of joy and normalcy in life, and for a few minutes, they had quality entertainment and felt like a normal person. Story 6. My manager was an absolute fiend. She would order me to help her in another building and just go to town. Toilets, meeting rooms, her boss's office, lift, hallway BJ in the back of a taxi. It all stopped because a new employee started that she fancied more, and then I assume he got the treatment. It was a wild few months. Story 7. My manager didn't like me because I intimidated him. I'm not some hulking brute, just an slightly above average Joe. But for some reason, I intimidated him. He also didn't like me because he was infatuated with a girl that worked in a different department, a girl that I had to talk to frequently because of my job duties. One night, there's a request from upper management about a shipment that is due in, but not until after hours. They asked if I, shipping, receiving, and her, inspection, would stay and get this truck taken care of. My manager went livid. The two of us were gonna be like in the warehouse alone. No dice, he was staying too. I told management that if he was staying, there's no need for me and I was going home. For some reason, they didn't even hesitate and told my manager to go home. He then turns to the girl and literally tells her that he forbid her to stay. This is as management is telling him to leave. So we stay and now she's livid. Who the duck was he to talk to her like that? After about a half hour of waiting for this truck, she comes into my office still seething. You know he is so jealous of you, right? He tells me all the time that I'm not allowed to talk to you. Well, he can duck off and I'll give him something to be jealous about. I'm just kind of looking at her and she says, "Do you want it? Let's go." I'm like, "Want what?" And she starts unbuttoning her jeans. She pulls them down over her ass, pulls them back up and says, "I have a better idea. Come on." She leads me over to his office, gets naked and sits on his desk. "Let go, right here." So we did. We ducked on top of his desk. When we were done, she said, "And I'm not cleaning it up either. Let him find it." We get dressed, ordered a pizza, and waited for the truck. The rest of the time I worked there, she never brought it up or acted any different than she ever did. Story 8. I once asked my coworker if he was a grower or a shower. He said grower, so I asked if he'd show me later. He said, "How about now?" And I gave him a HJ in a closet. Story 9. I worked at a pizza delivery place / local chain. The manager was a decent guy, but everyone that worked in the kitchen were stoners and actually pretty cool guys in my opinion. They would bust our balls and give us a hard time when the restaurant was really busy, but then after it slowed down, we had all made good money on deliveries and it was fun. One night it was late and I was getting everything done before we closed, and a few of the guys asked me if I wanted to smoke with them. I said yes because at the time I was also a stoner. They told me to meet then out by the dumpsters to smoke, and I was excited because these guys were really cool to me. They had wives, really good substances, and partied all the time. My heroes, right? So I take out the garbage and they pack a bowl, prepare the substances for me, and I take a big hit. But it didn't taste like substances. All of a sudden I have this crazy head rush and everything kind of went wonky. One of the guys, who was a short dude, got in my face laughing, saying, "That's substances, Karen." I was like, "What was that?" So I stumble back to the restaurant, and I'm like trying to act normal while I'm mopping, because the manager's there in the back room finishing his work, but I'm still kind of ducked up. Finally, it wears off after maybe 5 more minutes, and we close down the restaurant. I never did find out what I smoked that night, but it was pretty cool. I don't think it was actually substances. My guess is they spiked my bowl with some salvia, but I've never taken salvia before, so I'm not sure, I don't do anything like that anymore, though. I got my act together pretty soon after that. Story 10. I used to work at this college bar with my girlfriend at the time, and I was a key holder. I don't know why, but we got real high one night, and after the bar closed and the staff left, we snuck back in with a drill and hole saw set. I made a glory hole that connected the restrooms, and she gave me a BJ. This was almost over a decade ago. I visited my old hometown a couple weeks ago, and the hole we made that night has never been patched up. Story 11. I worked at a gym that was open until about 9. My girlfriend at the time met me there, and we went out for a couple of hours before I brought her back to her car at the gym around 11. She wound up going down on me in my car. I looked to the left, and staring down at me from the windows of the walking track was Hector, our overnight janitor, with the biggest grin and the biggest pair of thumbs up I've ever seen. I've never felt more supported. Story 12. I worked at a well-known grocery store, and there was a manager all the women loved. They'd swoon over him, tripping over their feet, rushing to get in his line. And because I'm always so anti whatever everyone else is, I played it off like he wasn't all that. He was tall, 6 feet 3 to 4, gorgeous, slim man. Always had his hair nice and lined up, and a big, beautiful, healthy beard. But I gave him no play. So one day, I truly don't know what came over me, but he said something to me, and this wasn't the first time, and I just said, "Okay, let's do it." "When?" And he looked shocked and said, "Right now." So we went into the cooler, the store's open, and there are shoppers, and he bent me over a pallet of produce and ducked me. It was amazing. We pulled our pants up and went back to work. Maybe 2 to 3 weeks later, while the store was busy, he told me to go into the office to sign a paper our store manager needed. So I jumped off my register and called the other cashier to take my place till I finished up. I went in and there was no paper. He followed behind me maybe 5 minutes later and did it again. We wrapped up and went back to work. He hit me up 2 months after he quit, and I regret not answering because I'd have loved to go another round with him. Wonder where he is now, because at that point he was engaged. Story 13, a colleague and I were dealing with some intense tension due to how closely we had to work on certain scenes. It finally came to a head during a production while I was helping her with a stuck zipper on her costume before our next scene. For some reason, it got her hot and bothered, and she couldn't focus on anything but how horny she was. So we snuck up to the catwalks above the stage and ducked. Once that night's show was done, we went back to where I was staying during that leg of the tour and proceeded to literally break the bed. Story 14. As an it guy, I've had many. Hooking up a video camera to a TV for an old guy years ago. Get a blue screen, hit play. Home-filmed adult film comes up on the screen. Working at a dental office. Abledent.com was a dental app I was installing on a bunch of new PCs. Abeldent.com was an adult site. Guess how many times I mistyped it in front of the client. Girl and her boyfriend come in for help on a laptop. I open it, but windows to her naked as the desktop background. Boyfriend huffs. She say, "What? I don't care. I'm not ashamed." And I just pretend it's not there and don't say anything. A guy was working for us, referred his dad's 40-year-old friend, recycle bin completely full of CP, reported to police. Police guy asks if I watched it. I told him no, I don't want to see it. Immediately starts opening videos in front of me. I quickly move to the opposite side of the screen. He watches about 5 videos, leaves with no further instruction. I fix the computer and give it back to his wife that comes to pick it up. Story 15. Came into work on a Sunday to catch up on some stuff that was due on Monday. Took a break to walk around and stretch my legs. Was on another floor walking when I heard some shuffling around in one of the cubicles. Figuring it might be someone I know, I headed over. Got to where I could see who it was. It was indeed someone I knew, and he was butt-ass naked, just working away. He never noticed I was there and I slid out. Never said a word about it. He did get busted by security some weeks later for the same thing though, and was let go. Story 16. I had an employee who was always very nice to me, but that was it. She came into my office one day and after a bit of small talk. She came around my desk to give me a hug. After a brief embrace, she dropped to her knees and procs to give me a deep BJ, right? I begin the pounding. As I look up, I see a colleague looking at us. My eyes go wide open, not stopping. Of course, the colleague walks out abruptly. The sex goes on until I can't hold it anymore. I tell her someone saw us, as she says, "No problem. I quit before I came in here." The end is the guy who saw us. Came to me and high-fived me and said, "I am so jealousy. I am still working there." Story 17. I work late-night security for different sites, so I found people trying to do it in many places. I think my favorite was, I was in a security cart peak 2020. I like going to the top of this parking structure, 6 floors up, to smoke at the top alone and feel like a main character because it's a nice view and very atmospheric under stars and lights. So I was driving up blasting Zoom from The Last Dinosaurs when 2 people started running down the staircase getting dressed. My thought process is, if they are leaving already, I don't need to stop them to tell them to leave. I reached the top where they were. They had left a bunch of stuff. A soft blanket, fried chicken, a peach ice vape right out the box, some weed, a ton of unopened condoms and women's underwear. I thought I must have really ducked up their date night. I left it there just in case they wanted to sneak back up and grab them, but they've never came back, so I ended up tossing them away before the morning shift arrived. Story 18. Coworker kept shooting his shot, and I kept declining. He locked me in an office, said he knew where all the camera blind spots were, and he wasn't letting me out until I satisfied him. Got out of that situation unscathed and reported him. The owner disregarded my report and did nothing. That same coworker gave me alcohol at work. Someone saw him, and one of my other coworkers taught him a lesson. He was finally fired after 13 complaints against him by different people. Turns out he was a SO, and they messed up his background check. Story 19. Someone I was training offered me a sex situation. She stank and was hella pregnant. I declined. About a year later, she was fired for knowingly showing up to work while sick with COVID. Dumb, stinky Karen tried to sue for that. Story 20. I went into a relax booth with a coworker in the office. We couldn't lock the door, so I figured we'll just share a few kisses and go on about our day. Those kisses turned rather passionate. She pushed me against the wall, kneeled in front of me, took out my member, and proceeded to give me the BJ of my life. It was so ducking hot. I was genuinely surprised, shocked even, when I felt approaching to climax. I let her know and she did not let go. She swallowed, and I loved her for it and for proving me wrong. Story 21. I used to work in a law firm as a procurator, not a prosecutor, and this is a half-career diploma. And there was this tall, blonde, female lawyer that I regularly had to work with that always used dresses that showed her amazing shape, but her legs were in another league, almost infinite, tanned and with amazing thighs. Once I brought her a ton of papers, and by mistake, half of it fell to the floor. I tried my best to pick all the stuff ASAP, but 98% of my concentration was on her legs and her feet. She was bare feet and playing with her toes. Suddenly, she said, "Everything all right down there?" And I stood up as a thunder while hitting the table with my head with enough G-force to make a rocket explode in the process. I disappeared at light speed from her private office. Yes, I know this is far from many other hardcore NSFW moments, but her legs were amazing, and I was lucky to enjoy them later on, because we dated a few times, and we did the dirty thing. Story 22. Used to work at a horse racing stable with a very old-school DIY trainer. The wash bay hose was hung from a metal boom arm to keep it out of the way of horses standing on it and putting holes in it, and the hose had come loose from the arm, so it had to be reattached before the next morning, to wash the sweat off all the racehorses that had worked that day. I was the only other person on site. This man stuck an empty wooden pallet on the forks of his dodgy old tractor. I'm talking this thing was probably around when the wheel was invented. Got me in the cab to drive it. I had never driven a tractor before in my life and stood on the not even tied-on pallet 5 meters plus in the air over the concreted wash bay with thick metal rails to tie horses on, while I lifted him up on the forks and tried not to accidentally tip him off and hit him. Story 23. Not me, but my boss. Married boss? Gave a sales manager a gummy in the parking lot around midnight after a work event. Really stupid move since our production facility had guys that worked nights loading trucks and they were caught. She didn't come out of her office for weeks. Same boss, different event. She was caught by the cleaning crew going at it with a VP in his office after hours. Meanwhile, I managed to work there for 28 years without boinking someone in the office. Not like she moved up in the org either. Story 24. A weird one. I'm 26 minutes. Was standing at the communal kitchen basin and had just squirted a big glob of whitish liquid soap onto my hand, then turned the tap on to find that the water had just been cut off for some kind of repair. I turned to my nearest work colleague, 54F, holding out my hand covered in the soap that I now couldn't wash off, and said in surprise, "Look what just happened to me." Then suddenly realized from her look of confusion and disgust that the soap looked an awful lot like a certain fluid. Awkwardness ensued. Story 25. I have not been able to validate this, and it's slightly off the question, but I've been told that during World War II, the airplane companies on the West Coast were desperate for employees. They found a source of labor with little people with dwarfism. They were physically ineligible for military service, but capable of working in manufacturing. In fact, their small stature was an advantage, because laborers would often have to squeeze into tight places. At that time, lots of these little people were the only little person that lived in their small town. Further, in the 1940s, most had few prospects for romantic relationships in those towns, so they welcomed the opportunity to move to the West Coast. The problem was they kept banging one another during work. They knew this was a once-in-their-lifetime opportunity, so they'd always sneak into a wing, a Bombay, or whatever, and screw. There were heavy demands to pump out planes to make their quotas, so managers were constantly breaking up liaisons to keep people working. I hope it is true. Story 26. I was at my job as a concierge while I was ovulating really hard, and had to tell one of my closest friends at work, lived at the building, that he had to stay a safe distance away from me, because the way he smelled after coming back from the gym was extremely potent, and that if he got within 5 feet of me, he was probably going to get duck. He was flattered, and honestly, I would have had sex with him, if not for his raging body issues surrounding himself and others. There's only a certain amount of times you can see a guy bring home a cute girl and call her a 2 after having sex with her, and his nitpicking, that I knew better than to have sex with some insecure man with dysmorphia who would probably see any sign that I've enjoyed at lunch in my lifetime and act like I was a whale, even though I'm pretty underweight. Story 27. As a concierge, twice I've ducked at my job, and twice I've been caught, but they never did anything about it, because I guess we couldn't find anyone else to hire. It was quite amusing. I accidentally duck an X on my break in one of the private rooms we have for about 3 hours out of the camera view. But either way, I'm sure they knew what happened, because maybe an hour after my shift ended, I'm sure they played back the footage and saw what I was up to, since they immediately replaced the big wooden door with the glass door. On top of that, same X back shots in the parking lot at like 5 a.m. in his car. Maybe an hour later, I saw the maintenance guy who worked at the building come in, and he had a bit too happy of a smirk on his face. A tad more social than usual. I'm not sure if he saw anything, but at the same time, I didn't care. Story 28. As an ex-paramedic, I fondly remember Mr. Candlelight. His name was a bit misleading, though. It wasn't lit. It was a rare occurrence because people with his condition usually don't call an ambulance, but he had thought it was a good idea to let it end naturally. It didn't end naturally, and after 7 days of eating and accumulating waste pressing against the obstacle, it became an emergency. If you are a man over 40, don't try to impress your new partner with artistic moves that totally worked 15 years ago. You didn't do it for a while because your ex didn't have any sex drive for the last years. But dude, it's like riding a bike, so you thought you didn't have to warm up. You should have warmed up, or hit the Kegel gym, or, accept that you are not 25 anymore. LPT, don't use something barbed or easily chipping for sounding. If you don't know what sounding means, forget this sentence. No need to look it up. Story 29. Former workplace. Stumbled upon an oddly placed pallet, like 5 rims high and the lid askew. I was going to move it out of the way, but as I came closer, I realized that this was a box, complete with a stash of mags and the line manager currently in the finishing stages. I legged it TF elsewhere. Story 30. Worked in an office during the evening, One of my coworkers, who I only worked with once a week, had been super flirty. She started texting me some dirty stuff. She said she wanted me to bend her over the desk. Our boss usually went to get some food around 6 p.m. My coworker ended her shift at 5, and she agreed to stay near the area, and she would come back at 6. As soon as my boss left, my coworker came back within 5 minutes. I ducked her pretty good for about 20 minutes in one of the back offices. Our boss came back unusually fast that day and almost caught us. My coworker snuck out the side door with a load inside her. Got to do that with her about a handful of times before I ended up leaving the job for something else. I have this girl on Instagram, but she's married now. Story 31. I used to run a bar that was inside a building, and technically it was open to the public, but 99.99% of our customers worked in the building. I became friendly with the employees and would get invited to come out with them. I hooked up with one of them, and the next day HR came down to the bar around closing and sat down. She said, "Ook told me that you two went out for drinks last night." "Yeah, we did. It was a good time. We saw some friends from another restaurant I've worked at." "Oh, that's nice." "She said that you had a good night after drinks." At this moment, I'm certain that I'm going to get my contract canceled. Well, I panicked stutters. "We should get drinks and have a good night too." And so we did. And that kicked off a wonderland of a few years being the local himbo. Story 32. This was back in the 90s. Worked at a Fortune 500 computer distributor with a sizable sales force. There was this gal, we'll call her Kimmy. She was a portly gal who wasn't very attractive, but was a heck of a salesperson. She had a habit of wearing short skirts. One day, as I'm walking down the aisle to my desk, I see her walking the same direction ahead of me, heading to the mail/fax room. She fumbles the papers she's holding, dropping them on the floor. Promptly bending over at the waist to pick them up, her short skirt revealed that she was wearing no underwear full beaver shot, and not a short glimpse either. It was a full 7 seconds or better before she straightened up. I quickly detoured down a different aisle to get to my desk, and that stuck in my head when I didn't want it to. Story 33. Had sex with the copy and print manager at Office Depot in the back office, where we kept all the box printers and high-value items. Anytime someone bought one, I had to go back and get it, and the copy manager and I had been flirting heavy for ages. I had to go back, and she had to unlock the door. She followed me in this time and was blocking the door for me to leave. I told her I was going to bend her over and slap her if she didn't move, and well, she didn't. One thing led to another, and we had the best quickie of my life. I was full of adrenaline the rest of the day. Story 34. I was working for an organization company that arranges music, clowns, etc. for events. We were driving somewhere, 2 hours away as a crew of 5. Boss and his son in front, his wife, me, and a female coworker at the same age as me in the back of a really old SUV with full of party stuff in the trunk. I was in the middle, and she was right next to me on left side. I started playing with her while thinking all these stuff were quite subtle, and that was exciting and full all the way. And after we arrived, boss's wife told me that we should be more careful because we might not, in all scenarios, could get away with it. Story 35. Me and a few female coworkers were talking about sex and man's lack of ability to find the G-spot. When I told them I knew what it felt like and that it makes me rock hard, one of the coworkers said they'd like to see my stuff. Being in the lifestyle, I had a pic of it on my phone. So I showed her, and then the other 3 wanted to see it. Fast forward 2 weeks later, and my wife had watched me have sex, and I also found their spots. Story 36. So I had this summer job where I got hired for security. It was a night shift, and I was tasked with typical surveying of the building. It was getting pretty boring, constantly, almost falling asleep. Pretty much all I did to pass the time was watch the cameras or mess with the lights. At one point, I noticed on the security cameras, the animatronics on the stage started to move. I started freaking out. I soon realized work was not being so safe. I used the security doors to keep them out. They terrified me. Worst part is, for some dumb reason, I worked there for 5 nights. And all I got paid was $100.50. Can't believe I risked my safety for that sum. Story 37. I worked as a student at an electronics store. Customer walks in and is asking why he can't play his videos from his video camera. He used the wrong cable and connection. No worries. I showed him on our TV output how to do it, which is connected to the wall of TVs. I was not worried, thinking it was a basic holiday video. Instead, I showed the whole store his wife in the bathroom. Luckily, it was a quiet afternoon, so not a lot of people noticed. I stopped the video feed and told him that's how you do it. He ran out the store red-faced, but his wife was laughing the whole way out. Fun times. Story 38. I worked in at an alternative shop at the mall. My much older and hot manager would buy us rum and mix it in food court cups and would drink on the evening shifts. Then we would duck when no one was in the store. She'd do BJ me while I was checking out a customer once. Our registers were elevated and you couldn't see much from the other side. Wild times. Story 39. There was only 2 of us on shift, myself and a female coworker. We lost power and got told to lock up, so that's what we did. Due to power loss, the only way in was through the front door, which meant if we went down the back, no one could see us, and we would have plenty of warnings if any other staff tried to get in. So we went down the back and had sex to kill some time. We were lucky we finished when we did, as the boss turned up to check on everything. I'm pretty sure he suspected we were up to no good, but there was no way he could prove anything. Story 40. While working in hotels as the general manager, quite a few things from female guests opening the door naked, guests asking to have something looked at, one of the maids trying to abuse me, flight attendants going out for drinks and asking me to come up to their room. More stories than this, to be honest, but in a few years, I definitely encountered more in my short time than I would have ever expected. In construction, seeing a guy get ducked from behind by another coworker in a job site lift would probably take the cake. Story 41. Flirted with a coworker, asked if she wanted to see what I had going on, showed her a pic at work. Flirting continued for about a month, was going to hook up, felt guilty, came clean to my GF. I came clean to my boss because I felt blackmailed to continue. Had an ethics complaint filed against me, got fired, and now can't work at Walmart ever again. Yes, I'm working on myself and learned my lesson. Story 42. In the stockroom at a kitchen supply store job, we noticed that the dinky little ladder corporate said we could have it was only rated for 180 pounds. We regularly moved boxes in the 30 to 50 pound range, with it for storage on rolling racks in the storeroom. And most of us, while holding a box, were over that limit. We quickly decided the best way to do the job was to lock the racks in place, roughly shoulder width apart, and walk up them using the shelves as ladder steps. Each shelf was rated for thousands of pounds, so it felt safer than the wobble green ladder ever did. Story 43. I worked on a TV show about escort in Detroit. There were a lot of other shows going on in that building. Someone reported me for looking at adult film. Had a whole hour meeting and everything where I calmly said to the HR lady, "Do you know which show I'm on?" To which she replied, "Blah, blah," at which point it clicked for her. I politely asked her to tell whoever reported me the situation, so they aren't spreading around that I'm a pervert or something, and maybe tell them not to look in my bay if that kind of thing is going to offend them. Story 44. I was a shipper for a small-scale factory years and years ago. We had an order that was by all accounts too big for us to handle, but it was a huge payday, so we won the bid. I had to come in on a Saturday and Sunday for straight pay to get it ready to go on a truck Monday morning. I asked if I could bring my girlfriend to hang out since we were losing our weekend together. Then we had sex on the boss's desk. Story 45. This is far from the most NSFW moment, but it's a funny one. I'm a chef and went to show the owner a series of Oxford of a dish we made. Swiped the wrong way and he saw a full-frame junk pic. He spent the day telling the staff he'd seen my junk and kept using the word impressive. I got home and told my wife simply, "Chef saw my junk today." Her reply? "What kind of ducking dress code do you guys have there?" Story 46. About 10 or 15 years ago, I was reading about the Large Hadron Collider at work and wasn't sure what a hadron was. So I Googled it, but accidentally transposed the D and the R in hadron. I suddenly found myself looking at things that were most certainly not subatomic particles. I was convinced that it was going to barge into my office and throw me out of the building, but it turns out that they only investigate people's browsing history. There's a complaint. I guess if I run into Peter Higgs in the afterlife, I'll have a mildly amusing anecdote to tell him. Story 47. Got a BJ from a girl I was dating in the cooler at a gas station. Was almost caught when a cop walked in to tell us the line was going around the store twice, then outside. Fortunately, I caught sight of him as he opened the door and had to turn a corner once inside. Story 48. This happened today. I, male, was in the stall at work, about to take a crap, and the maintenance guy comes in with a ladder and starts changing the bulbs in the light directly in front of my stall. He didn't announce his presence at all, and when he saw me in the stall, he didn't stop or leave or anything, just kept working on the light. I've got mixed feelings about telling a boss about it. Story 49. When I was active duty submarines, we had a family cruise. I had the only key to the log room as the others with a key didn't attend that cruise. Wife and I went in during angles and dangles, maneuvering at speed, doing up and down and turns. Did the deed from one side of the room to the other in multiple positions, while my shipmates and family waited outside in the passageway for lunch. Story 50. 1. Started working at a hospital. First day bent over at the tube port. Someone came up and got an entire handful of my package. She thought I was a similar-looking coworker. Story 51. I've mentioned this before on similar question. Back in 1995, when I started my career as software dev, the dev lead and dept manager got into an argument over C++ semantics. The dev lead leaped over his pod and proceeded to wrestle with the manager. The manager got the upper hand. Myself and another junior developer split them up and diffused the situation until the owner showed up. Yes, this 100% happened. Story 52. I work in the storage drive industry. Had an ex-manager hand me drive to help him recover his personal data. I recovered a lot of nude pictures of him and his wife. Was very awkward when I gave him another drive with his data. Guess I could ask for a raise. Story 53. I worked at a movie theater. Second day there, a coworker gave me a BJ in the stockroom, and I busted all over the boxed candy. Don't worry, I threw it all away. Can't speak for all the other high schoolers cleaning up after themselves after being back there to restock for 20 minutes. It was a pretty fun job other than having to work most weekends. Story 54. In the early 90s, I bought a used Mac for the business where I was working. Money was tight. When we set it up, we found there was no space on the hard drive, even though it appeared to have been wiped. So I searched for hidden files and found loads of hot images. I reformatted the hard drive, and they used the Mac for several more years. Story 55, my first job. The guy who interviewed me told me I had a great smile and hired me on the spot. We flirted back and forth, and then one night we kissed in the back office, and I was 18 and a virgin. He was 21, so nothing else was happening, but that was probably the most NSFW thing I've ever done. Story 56, waitressing. Coworker's bra wire came out and was stabbing her, so we found some pliers, and I tried to pull it out for her. Boss walked in to find her holding onto her tits while I strained to pull the wire out, rolled his eyes, and walked out again. Story 57, I work as an artist. I've done body painting and I've done nude portraits of people. Sometimes they get a little excited while I'm painting them, either painting directly on their body or while they're posing. Also had a similar thing back when I did a tattoo apprenticeship. Story 58, working one Saturday, encountered our very cute Hawaiian computer operator, long ago, wearing a skirt and a flippy little bolero jacket with nothing at all under it. Jacket hanging quite open. I got a nice eyeful for a few seconds. She didn't see me. Turns out she was having an affair with her boss, who was also working that weekend. Story 59. I got a job bartending at a busy 2-story bar/restaurant because the owner was female and her friend thought I was attractive. My first night, another one of her middle-aged, intoxicated female friends kept telling me I was ducking hot and eventually insinuated with her tongue and fingers. There were plenty other situations, but way more pleasant than that woman. Story 60. I worked at this factory with a bunch of different women, and one woman asked me to meet her by the bathroom. So I met her there, and she took me into the woman's room, into the stall, and gave me a BJ, and when we walked out, the manager was standing right there and fired us.